Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I'm going to be covering an episode from Season 7, Episode 7, The Captive, when Elizabeth learns to drive, or tries to learn to drive, and Corabeth Godsey struggles with alcohol problems. This episode was directed by our very own Ralph Waite, who himself is a recovering alcoholic. If you are enjoying these, please do hit like and subscribe. And just a reminder that I will be away the first 2 weeks of October. It would be interesting to me to know how much input Ralph had about this episode, whether he requested to direct it, whether he suggested the subject matter, whether they, knowing Ralph's history, thought that he would be the right person to direct it. I have no idea, and unfortunately at this point there's no way to go back and ask him. But he dealt with it with tremendous sensitivity and obviously quite a strong, difficult subject matter to deal with someone who is such an important part of the cast. Now, of course, Mary Ellen, I had that episode where I dealt with getting addicted to sleeping pills and then uppers and stuff when I was trying to get through my nursing exams. But in this episode, they address the fact that evidently Corabeth has had a drinking problem for some time. Ike knows about it, but has been trying to ignore it, hoping it'll go away, trying to do everything he can to try and keep Corabeth happy in hopes that if she's happy, she will choose to stop drinking. Amy starts suspecting what's going on, and Amy finds herself trying to protect her mom and trying to care for her and trying to take care of her and cover for her and things like that. But it's getting more and more difficult for Amy to deal with that as well. It seems that Corabeth has been feeling trapped in her life. She feels very dissatisfied. She feels that Ike is not the husband of her young girlish dreams. Her mother said a tall, handsome man would come and pretty much sweep her off her feet. And somehow Ike doesn't quite live up to that image that she had. And so she's always feeling that she's yearning for something else. And perhaps we can all relate to that in some aspects of our life at times where we feel dissatisfied, but the way in which we deal with it says a lot about our character and our strengths and weaknesses. This is obviously an area where Corabeth struggles, so she has a weakness here. She's trying all sorts of different things, one scheme after another, to try and find something to hold on to in her life that will satisfy her in some way. She's going to, she was going to go into real estate. She's going to go into interior decorating in this particular one. And so she gets all jazzed up about how she's going to become an interior decorator. And Ike has clearly been putting out a lot of money trying to help support the things Corabeth wants to do, but he's at his wit's end. She goes to the Baldwins thinking that the Baldwins will be a great place to start, that of course she would redecorate their home. She goes there, and of course they sit down. They're going to have tea with her. They're going to add some recipe, and she's, sort of being coy. Oh, no, I couldn't possibly. And then she does have the recipe added to her tea, and then shortly after has a straight cup of tea. Meanwhile, she raises the issue of the decorating and that it takes somebody with taste and elegance. Well, the Baldwin sisters misunderstand and think that she's talking about them becoming interior decorators, and she has a little bit of a meltdown there and then leaves. And I think the sisters are very upset and disappointed and perhaps feel badly that they misunderstood Corabeth. But this is another one of Corabeth's dreams that has now failed. And so then she's on to her next one, which is going to be to start a dance school. She goes, she puts a deposit down on a studio space in Rockfish and is determined that she is then going to start a dance studio. All of this is just really driving her more and more into the alcohol and the ways in which she covers it, hides it. There's a point where she's in her home and she's drinking, and Amy comes and knocks on the door, and she sprays something in her mouth, and I'm thinking, it looks like a perfume bottle. Is she seriously spraying perfume in her mouth, or just trying to spray it around her face to cover the scent? We see her sneaking into the pantry to where her bottle is stored. We see in the studio that she has hidden it in the upper toilet tank that is up on the wall. So all the ways in which I guess people with these sorts of issues will find ways to try to hide what they're doing. Ultimately, when Corabeth passes out driving Elizabeth and Amy home, it hits its crisis point. And, somebody could have been killed. Ike doesn't know what to do. Amy finally says, come on, let's quit beating around the bush. We know what it is. She was drunk and she passed out. Ike can't talk to Corabeth. She won't talk to him. He pleads with Jon to talk with her. Corabeth tells Jon that she wants him to help her leave Walton's Mountain, leave Ike. And Jon basically says no. And he talks with her and he shares a story about when he was in the army, that someone he knew who got heavily into alcohol as a means to try and deal with what was happening, and ultimately was responsible for a number of his company being killed. They talk. Corabeth realizes she's going to have to face these demons, and with the help of Ike and Amy, that she can get through it, that she can. It's not going to be easy, but it is the way forward. And as Jon is leaving, she says,
that friend of yours in the army, that was you, wasn't it?
Good night, Corabeth.
Thank you, Jon.
The necessity to be a mother to Amy, that Amy needs her there, is one of the things that prompts Corabeth to pull herself together, and rather than diving further into this rabbit hole she's going down, to recognize that she needs to move forward and she needs to find a way forward. And then she has a beautiful scene with Ike where she just confesses to him where she's at and how scared she is and all of that. Ike talks about how he has loved her from the moment he saw her, and she reiterates to him that she loves him and that she needs him and that she's going to need his strength to get through this, and he says he will be there with her every step of the way. So we are left with this sense of hope going forward, that as a family, Ike and Corabeth and Amy are going to all pull together to help Corabeth through this difficult time. And the final narration also makes reference to that although it wasn't always easy, that Corabeth did make it through and continue to conquer these demons of hers and find a way to stay away from the alcohol as a solution. On the lighter side of things, Elizabeth is 13 and feels that with the impending war, that it is her patriotic duty to learn to drive. And she gets permission from Daddy, and Jim Bob says, okay, he'll give her a driving lesson. He takes her out in his car, not the easiest car to drive of the cars we had on the show. And Elizabeth is having all kinds of trouble, and she tends to close her eyes if something's coming towards her. She gets very intimidated. So that doesn't work. And then Ben takes her out in the family truck, and she's driving that, and she's going so slow, and he says, speed up, and then she speeds up, and he's like, a turn's coming up, and he says, no, too fast for the turn, and she sort of runs into a bush. And then Jason, very kind-heartedly, takes her out in John Boy's car. He's being very supportive, but we see that she has driven it into Drucilla's pond.
You know I love you, and I think you're a real neat person. And what you're trying to do, learning to drive at 13, I think it's real spunky.
You're angry.
I'm not angry.
It's really okay if you want to take me home. I mean, today's just not my day.
So she's decided that no, she is a menace and she really shouldn't drive. But then when she ends up at the Baldwins, and Corabeth drives off with Amy, and the Baldwin sisters find out that Elizabeth is learning to drive, they're like, oh, well, why don't you drive? They were going to drive her home, but instead it is decided that Elizabeth will drive the Baldwin sisters. So Elizabeth's like, yeah, sure. So Elizabeth drives their vehicle, and as she comes to the house, and she's a little out of control and ends up driving it right into the garden. And Jon's like, oh no, is everyone okay? Everyone's okay. And the Baldwin sisters thought it was just a lovely little adventure. So Elizabeth has really decided she's not going to drive up until that final point when Corabeth passes out while driving Amy and Elizabeth home. And Amy basically says, they're in the middle of nowhere. No one's going to come by, and says, Elizabeth, you have to drive. So Elizabeth faces her fears and manages to get them home. And he is afraid Daddy's going to be upset. And he says, no, in this case, he felt that she did well and he's not upset with her. So I don't know that Elizabeth at that moment is going to continue with her driving lessons. I think it might be a few more years or another season or two before we see Elizabeth potentially driving again. That's what I have for you for this segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. I will be back with more Behind the Scenes of the Waltons and more of your questions in a segment of Ask Judy. Thanks for watching.